This video is brought to you by Ground News. As Mr. Brexit himself, journalists and voters have known what Farage has stood for his entire political career. Anti-woke, anti-establishment and Eurosceptic, Farage has constantly led parties that share these views. However, in recent weeks and months, Reform UK seems to have moved to the left, especially economically, with key figures, including Farage himself, pushing the Labour government to nationalise more key industries. So in this video, we're going to have a look at Reform's move to the left, what motivates it, and whether it will actually work. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. Now, it's probably worth starting by explaining exactly what the Reform Party is, and broadly what they believe. The party first came into existence as the Brexit Party back in November 2018. Back then, Theresa May was still Prime Minister, and she was struggling to progress on Brexit with such a rowdy and divided Conservative Party behind her. Powerless, Farage had to just sit and watch as the culmination of his life's work in politics was being, in his eyes, frittered away by a party that didn't truly believe in it. The aim of the Brexit Party was to try and push the Conservatives to negotiate a harder Brexit, specifically urging them to leave the EU without a deal and to trade internationally on World Trade Organization terms. In the run-up to the 2019 general election, Farage developed this and came up with a more rounded policy platform. He promised there would be no privatisation of the NHS under him, that immigration would be reduced, that inheritance tax would be abolished, and to create something akin to the US Supreme Court. Put simply, the party stood for lower taxes, lower immigration, and constitutional reform. Then, following the 2019 election and the UK's withdrawal from the EU under Boris Johnson, the party rebranded itself as Reform UK. Initially, it stood as an anti-lockdown party, but at the 2024 election, Reform adopted a similar policy platform to that of the Brexit Party in 2019. They promised to freeze non-essential immigration, give tax cuts to small businesses, scrap net zero targets, ban transgender ideology in schools, and leave the European Court of Human Rights, or ECHR, among other things. Again, while some of these policies had clearly developed since the 2019 election and the name change that followed the election, they were broadly consistent with the right-wing populism we've come to expect from Farage over the years. The thing is, though, since the 2024 election, Reform has started to slightly shift its politics. One of the first indications we had of this came back in April, when the Labour government intervened to stop British steel collapsing. In order to prevent this, the government passed a new law called the Steel Industry Special Measures Act to essentially tell British Steel to keep the furnaces running. Notably, though, the bill did not go as far as renationalisation. Somewhat surprisingly, Farage then suggested that the government should have gone further and taken British Steel into public hands. Asked by Harry York from The Times whether Reform would renationalise any other industries, like, for instance, Thames Water, Farage suggested that they should be left to go bust and only temporarily nationalised before finding new bondholders. However, in an interview with the Spectator this week, Richard Tice, Reform's deputy leader, had a slightly different response, suggesting the taxpayer should buy Thames Water for £1 and that it would be a good deal. It's hard to see this as anything but a commitment to renationalisation. In this same interview, Tice actually addressed the argument that Reform was moving left head-on. He claimed that we should forget all these ridiculous labels and that Reform was actually just a common-sense party. To be fair to Tice, it's not necessarily left-wing to think that Thames Water and British Steel should be renationalised, given the patent failure of Thames Water's privatisation and the national security case for protecting your domestic steel industry. But this isn't the only evidence that Reform is moving left on economic issues. At the end of May, Farage held a conference in which he promised that, if he became Prime Minister, he would reinstate the winter fuel payment and scrap the two-child benefit cap. While Farage framed his opposition to the two-child benefit cap on natalist grounds, i.e. as a way of boosting the UK's birth rate, this nonetheless implies that, economically, Farage would be to the left of Starmer, at least when it comes to welfare spending. This is all on top of the £141 billion of spending increases over 5 years that Reform promised in their 2024 manifesto, which includes an extra £17 billion for the NHS. None of this is anything you'd really expect from a populist right-wing party. Not only do Reform want the government to take more industries under its control, but they also want to expand the welfare state, even going as far as tacitly, or even in some cases explicitly, criticising the Labour government for not doing so. So why is this? Why has Farage decided to take his party on this particular ideological journey? Well, to put it bluntly, it's probably to broaden his appeal. Swiftly following the general election last year, Reform overtook the Conservatives in the polls, largely as a consequence of former Tory voters switching to Reform. However, Farage knew that in order to overtake Labour, he would have to take some of their voters as well. This was confirmed by Richard Tice, who said in a recent interview, "Yeah, we're having a bit of Labour breakfast. At the end of the day, if you want to win elections, then you've got to win votes from all over." You might expect this to cause some tension with Reform's core voters, but according to YouGov polling, while Reform voters generally agree with socially right-wing ideas, such as the belief that young people don't respect British values and the belief that multiculturalism has failed, they're actually pretty left-wing when it comes to economic issues. For instance, 74% of Reform voters think that big businesses in the UK take advantage of ordinary people. 73% think that ordinary working people don't get a fair share of the nation's wealth. 71% believe that utilities like energy, water, and railways should be run in the public sector. And 69% believe that rich people should be taxed more than working people. The point we're making here is that Reform are able to move left economically without isolating their core voter base. Already, it seems like this is working, with them in recent months actually overtaking Labour in the polls. The key for Farage now, though, is holding this fragile coalition together. With tensions running high after Chairman Zia Yusuf suddenly resigned and then abruptly rejoined the party, this might be a particularly difficult job. If you want to know more about this topic, there's plenty of other outlets reporting about it online. Unfortunately though, it's sometimes hard to tell exactly which way these outlets lean politically, making it difficult to understand exactly how your view of world events is being biased by the sources you're reading. That's where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. Their website and app, developed by a former NASA engineer, allows us to pull back the curtain on media bias and have a look at exactly how each story is being covered. For instance, this story about Zia Yusuf resigning and then returning to Reform has been covered by 50 different sources. We know that around 10 of these have been reported by the left and 10 of these have been reported by the right. That's not all though. Ground News has tons of genuinely useful features. Take their blind spots feed, for instance. This shows you the stories underreported by one side of the political spectrum or the other. For example, if you lean left, you might have missed this story on Elon Musk floating the idea of a third party amid his feud with Donald Trump. Here at TLDR News, we think that Ground News is an incredibly useful tool for our current media landscape, one that's constantly trying to attract your attention and sway you towards or away from certain political viewpoints. So having a tool that helps you spot this and helps you take action really is a game changer. If you're interested in everything Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage Plan subscription by using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. This limited time offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.